In this next video, I want to show you the advantage I gained from studying with Murray, Spivack, and Richard Wilson. And when I say advantage, it's in relation to my speed. I am not a fast person. If you went out running with me, you would see that I am slow. I'm not fast like other people. So, the advantage I gained by studying with Richard Wilson and Murray Spivack was that I gained speed in my drumming that I previously didn't have. And that speed only comes from the fact that I'm relaxing in the manner they showed me and using gravity instead of fighting gravity. And that leads to my ability to play at the speed I do. Now, I do not consider myself to be a technical drum genius or a speed demon on the drums. So, whatever you see me do in this next video, I do not consider it to be playing very fast. In fact, I feel my own physical limitations in my body, and those are the things I try to improve when I practice and work out. So, to me, in my world, to myself, I don't consider myself to be a fast drummer. I hear other guys do things and I'm like amazed how fast they can do them. But if you're slow like me, if you learn to use gravity the way I'm showing you, you will see your speed goes up. And it's not because you're working hard to do it, it's because you're working with gravity and relaxing. Okay. Now, on the internet, if you go hunting on YouTube, you will find demonstrations of the 4-stroke Paradiddle and the Flam Paradiddlediddle. And both those rudiments are considered to be difficult to play. Now, I will admit that they are harder than some of the other rudiments to execute. But if you learn to use gravity, you will find that you can play these rudiments as fast as most other people demonstrate them. So, the first one I want to start off with is the 4-stroke rough paradiddle. So, all that means is you're playing the traditional paradiddle and putting a 4-stroke rough in front of it. And the 4-stroke rough is a demon in the room. It's how you play the 4-stroke rough that will determine the difficulty of the 4-stroke paradiddle. Now, when I watch online, I see people using the old marching method, holding the stick up in the sky and throwing their rough and then stopping up in the sky. And you'll see the stick up here in the eye. But what happens is when you play this way and use your fingers, you end up getting what is called a legato attack. Most of the notes sound about the same volume. And in these demonstrations I watch on the internet, the grace notes of the 4-stroke rough are almost as loud as the paradiddle. Grace notes, if you just look at a sheet of music, are these little tiny notes drawn in front of the 16th notes for the paradiddle. Grace notes, by their definition, grace notes means they're supposed to be played gracefully. That means soft. The purpose of a ruff is to make the note that those grace notes are going to sound thicker. So you don't want to articulate the grace notes as loud as the other notes, otherwise they're not grace notes. And that is the primary issue I hear when I see most people demonstrate a 4-stroke paradiddle with throwing into the drum. Some of them get a little better accent on the beginning of the paradiddle than others, but none of them are playing grace notes, because when you throw the stick into the head, that force on the way down makes the notes loud. And the faster you try to go, the more force you have to throw down with to achieve speed. And if you add more force on the way down, it will get louder. It's just physics. You can't play those notes loud and throw into them. It doesn't work. Not from up here. Okay? Now, when I was taught the 4-stroke paradiddle, the 4-stroke ruff, which is the first component of the 4-stroke paradiddle, I was taught there were 3 ways to play a 4-stroke ruff. And depending which one you use affects how you play that 4-stroke paradiddle. So, the first way I was taught to play a 4-stroke paradiddle was with an upstroke. So you play 3 soft notes, and guess what? The second note is an upstroke. So you get grace notes. Okay, so leads to a single-handed paradiddle. The difficulty in alternating then is you're playing that diddle, and now you gotta start with that same hand that played the diddle. So there's a bunch of notes in a row, and that is the difficulty in playing that rudiment and getting it to alternate. Okay? If you use this single stroke sticking, well, the speed you play it is kind of dependent on how fast you can move up and turn. Now, the alternative way of playing this, which makes it easier to play faster, is similar to what you see the marching drummers do, but with Murray, the idea was that you just made a little throw and let the notes rebound in between each other. It's the same as playing a roll, but the notes are moving in between one another. And the way you achieve that feeling of just bouncing and playing a 4-stroke roll is, it's like a flam. There's a grace note and a main attack. Now, when I lift up for that main attack, this hand is higher than this one. And then the instant I relax, they start down together. But because he's higher than this one, that's the grace note that starts the 4-stroke ruff when you toss it. Right to left, left to right. All alternate. So you can all exaggerate how high I lift the stick so you can see the sort of flam effect. But I just do it down here. Make sense? Now, so the 4-stroke paradiddle then, for me, is just throwing the stick down for that initial note and then playing the other notes of the paradiddle. And if you notice, I have grace notes and an accent and 16th notes. And my 4 strokes paradiddle is ending with the accent, but those are grace notes. Okay? You have to play grace notes. If they're grace notes, play them as grace notes, not notes. That is the danger of playing from here and throwing into the drum. You'll get a very smooth attack doing this. And you can get real even notes, and that's why people think it's a good way to play. And being even and smooth is good. But this way of playing goes back to timpani grip and timpani drum players, and they did that because they were calling it pulling the sound out of the drum. Now, if you're playing on great timpani with calfskin heads and you got the timpani mallets, it does sort of feel like that you're pulling that note out of the bowl of the drum. You are playing a pitched instrument, and that is different than a snare drum. That, using and adapting this timpani method to the drums is fine. It gives you a legato smooth attack. But it ignores the fact that this is a snare drum, and it's a very dynamic instrument, and it's explosive. It can go from whispering little notes to deafening notes. And that's a little different than timpani. And the goal of playing timpani, the reason they developed the technique they use on timpani, is to get a good note. And that note is supposed to blend with the brass or the strings in some fashion. That's how composers use the percussion instruments in an orchestra. Okay, so the purpose of a timpani grip was to get a good tone and note and get a legato, as the term is called in music, a smooth connected sound when you rolled. Okay, so all these people playing timpani grip or timpani turns or timpani wrist motions, it's fine. It's an old way of playing marching drums. Okay, you can develop that if you practice enough. It works. But I'm trying to show you what Murray and Richard did, which is based on anatomy and physics, which gives you an advantage, and having a floor, which is one of the principles of this, allows you to relax after every note you play. If you're holding this in the sky and then playing a note, you're holding, you're turning, you're holding. When do you relax? I relax after every single lift. I lift, and now I'm relaxed. Same thing I do when I walk. I lift it up, I relax, gravity matches my effort. If I lift it up faster, gravity pulls it down faster, and that's what I'm doing on the drums. That's what's different with Murray and Richard. We're using physics and not fighting gravity. You'll notice the faster you try to play and the louder, you get all tense when you try to do this faster, because you have to throw down with more force to go faster. And when you throw down with more force, you get louder. So you lose all your dynamic control to go faster. I just try to lift faster. At whatever height I lift is the volume. I don't make it louder, I just move faster. There's a mathematical formula. The acceleration of gravity. How fast the Earth is pulling stuff down. 33 point something feet per second, which is fast. 1001, you just went 33 feet. Okay? It's fast. Don't fight it. Don't fight it. Use it. Lift. If you can lift it 33 feet per second, it's awful fast, you will go down that fast. And you will have force. The mathematical force, the mathematical formula, is, I will call it G for gravity, times M, which stands for mass. Mass is your hand and the stick. How heavy are they? Or even your arm if you're adding that. It's all mass. So how fast it moves is how much force it creates. G times M equals F. Look it up or ask your science teacher at school to explain it to you. But you cannot break, that's a law of motion. So it's there, it exists. Use it, fight it, that's your choice. But fighting it leads to tension in your body and prevents you from getting as fast as you may be physically with your muscles and electrical nervous system and how fast it moves. If you're fighting gravity, you're going to lose some speed. and not be able to take advantage of how fast your body may be. And that's why I can play faster than some drummers that they can physically run circles around me. They're faster than me with everything they do, but when we both sit there on a drum and play, I suddenly can play some rudiments faster than they can. And to me, it's always like, what? What's wrong? Why can't you? And that's usually when they become my student, and I show them what Murray and Richard taught me. And then they get faster than me. If you use these principles, you can move your body to its total ability instead of maybe doing something that is counter to that. So, there are 3 ways then to play a 4-stroke rough. Let me get to the third one, because I talked about using upstrokes. Okay, and I talked about bouncing it. But you notice when I do it, I'm coming to the floor. Okay, how do I get that accent? This is something that takes a little while to learn. Now, when you're working on what I showed you in the first 2 videos, the roll chart, I talked about the squeeze or pull or follow through in the middle finger, and I'm exaggerating it and wiggling it so you can see it. You cannot see it when I'm playing. The follow through to the impact that makes the stick stop is a tiny squeeze or pull with the middle finger. And I talked about that in a lot of detail in the first video, so watch that video and you will see more of my explanation, okay? But as you develop that ability to pull as a follow through to the impact, you start to feel how to move that finger after the stick touches. Now, when I throw this 4-stroke rough, the stick hits the head and it naturally moves back. I'm not following it back and letting go. I'm just letting it move over the fulcrum point. It moves by itself in response to coming down, okay? So, as it moves up, I give a little tug with the finger. It's one of the only ways I use isolated finger control, if you want to call it that. But once you understand how to do that and add a little bit of wrist turn as you pull, that's how I'm getting my accent. But it still is that up and down motion. It's just that little squeeze and follow through is exaggerated, and that's what creates my accent. You can't see me do it, it just happens. It's a millionth of a second, right after the stick touches, bang! Okay, that's how I get the accent doing that. So, it's just throwing down the sticks in one motion to get a 4-stroke rough and get that accent so that those are grace notes. Make sense? Okay. Now the third way is the one I prefer, to be honest with you, because to my ear it sounds more like the traditional 3-stroke rough you probably already know, where you play 2 grace notes, right? Why not play those 2 grace notes the same way on the 4-stroke rough? So in other words, I play 3 grace notes with a rebound, and that rebound that I play is the same as playing a rebound on the roll chart. It's the same thing. So I can play a four-stroke rough faster than I can throw it down and still articulate the grace notes and get an accent. And paradiddles all have an accent on the first note. And if you play them all, if you play this rudiment legato, that accent tends to disappear and not be very forceful. But when I'm playing paradiddles, I want that accent on the first note. Well, it's pretty hard to. And again, me speed with that throw for those 4 grace notes in between the 16th notes. And as you play the 16th notes faster, you bring up the tempo of your paradiddle. That distance between the last note of the paradiddle and the first note gets so tiny, you can't squeeze 4 notes in there. It doesn't sound like anything. It just sounds like a mush. So I don't have a lot of use for the 4-stroke paradiddle, to be honest with you, at high tempos, because it's just a zip and a zip, and I can make that sound easier with the upstroke. So I can throw in a paradiddle, the 4-stroke rough into a paradiddle. I find that sticking more useful than, it's up to you. If you're fast enough with your 4-stroke rough, you might be able to squeeze it into your paradiddles. But personally, to me, the 4-stroke rough with it's just a technical exercise. I don't find much use for it in improvising with paradiddles when I'm playing a drum solo and interacting with other musicians. Going and trying to force it to alternate. It's a lot of work. I don't find it very musical, especially at the tempo I'm usually playing paradiddles. I can't fit a 4-stroke rough in between those 16th notes. If you can, my hat's off to you, but that's the problem for me with that rudiment. Where do I use it? Okay, well, like I said, I can get that alternated version of the sticking where I play 2 and 1 for the 3 grace note. Using that rebound sound at the beginning makes it sound more like a rough to my ear. Sounds 3-stroke rough, 4-stroke rough. I find that sticking more useful, and I can control it and get more dynamics out of it then. It's a lot of work to play a 4-stroke rough between the paradiddle that way. So it is a harder rudiment, but if you know the 3 different ways of sticking it, having that third way makes it more useful. Okay, the other rudiment I mentioned was the Flam, Paradiddlediddle. The difficulty with that, again, is alternating the Flam, Paradiddlediddle. Naturally wants to lead you back to the Flam. And when I play paradiddlediddles, they go one way. Okay, well, you can force it to alternate, and since I use an upstroke motion, when I get to that diddle at the end, I make an upstroke. The same upstroke I use in a roll. 7-stroke roll. Up, down. Okay, up and down. Same thing I do at the end of a paradiddlediddle. Up, up, up. Like I do it in a roll. The difference is I don't get this guy alternating in between like in a roll. You have to play that diddle and come right up off of it into a throw. Oh, what's that for? Well, to keep it going, you got triplets with an accent. Or you can take the accent out and just use the force of the throw to keep the stick in motion. That other law of motion. Once a body's in motion, it tends to stay in motion. So it doesn't require a lot of a throw force to keep it moving. Up and down, or down and up. But for this rudiment, it's up. A bounce, you bend, the wrist is loose. Once you bend that, this is loose. It's released. Pick it up and throw it. Dynamics, you want to make that accent. It's accented, it's not all legato and everything the same volume. That's fine, making everything even just makes everything sound smooth. I like the explosive nature of the snare drum. Loud, soft, the sudden impacts and changing is what, for me, is what draws the listener into what you're playing. If everything's legato and smooth, for the whole hour they're listening to you, they stop listening because it all starts to sound and feel the same. But when you play explosively, it's like, whoa, what the hell was that? And they're drawn back into what you're doing. So use the snare drum the way it's created. It's a dynamic instrument. It's not a timpani.